Thank you for that very nice introduction, Tracy. And it's so nice to be here with all of you. And thank you, Mark, for inviting me to the annual meeting. This is my first Lake Country annual meeting, so it's kind of exciting for me. You know, I was thinking about this year, and I have now been at GRE for 7 years. And it's been incredible getting to know all of our members and being able to work with everyone. And I feel like I joined GRE at such an incredible time in our industry. And, you know, what the transformation that's happening is exciting. I know there's a lot of challenges, but it really is an exciting time to be in the industry. But it also requires a lot of responsibility, which you heard Mark and Tracy talk about at length, and Craig as well. A lot of responsibility. But today I thought what I would do is give you a recap of Great River Energy last year, some of our successes that we had, and then focus on an area that's near and dear to my heart, transmission. Yeah, let me see. Like this? Oh, there we go. Yay. So many of you know this, but Great River Energy is the second largest electric provider in the state. And we have the great privilege of serving both generation and transmission to 26 cooperatives who own us. And we collectively serve customers that span 2/3 of the geography of the state of Minnesota and a little bit of Wisconsin as well. And through our members, we serve 1.7 million customers. Our wholesale electric rates are competitive and they're projected to remain steady for many years. We continue to transition our power supply, and I'll talk about that a little bit, you know, adapt to the changing market and the world that we're in. And we serve our members through over 5,000 miles of transmission, which I'll talk about as well. And as we develop our strategies to serve all of you, these are the principles that really guide what we do for our members. It's no surprise that reliability is number one, because it really is the most important attribute of electricity. It always has been, and it always will be, and it's table stakes for GRE. And last year, we had a pretty low occurrence of severe weather, and so it led to a pretty record-breaking year when it came to reliability. After having 12 years of experiencing at least one major outage event, we ended up breaking that trend last year. We didn't have an MOE 0, so that helped us quite a bit. But we know we also have to balance reliability against affordability. And we're hyper-focused on affordability because of the members that we have and the customers that they serve in rural parts of the states, some of the hardest to serve areas, and in some of the poorest counties of the states, and we're well aware of that. And we're seeing more and more of a need to make investments to maintain reliability to meet decarbonization goals. You know, our average 2024 wholesale rate is projected to increase by an average of 2.2% from the 2023 budget rate. So our rates remain nearly 20% below the regional average of utilities in the Midwest. But like many members, we are experiencing cost pressures, much similar to what Mark talked about when he was talking. I was sort of nodding my head. We're facing those cost pressures, supply chain issues, inflation. So affordability is something we're focused on with many of our strategies, and of course environmental stewardship. We always have that very important backdrop. But we're well positioned. I'll talk to you about how we are well positioned to achieve Minnesota's carbon-free standard. So despite a number of headwinds that we've faced over last year, we were able to accomplish a number of good things for our members. Our power supply portfolio transition heavily focused on making electricity in newer and cleaner ways. We began last year by entering 2 new wind agreements and added 300 megawatts to nameplate generating capacity, zero emission. We've also got agreements in place to purchase power output from 9 additional wind facilities in the Midwest. So decisions like this are keeping us on track to make sure we can achieve Minnesota's 2040 carbon-free standard. And because of the way that we're powering communities now, and shifting more toward renewable resources, the regional power grid that's used to deliver those resources has to change as well too. So we're investing in transmission infrastructure to enhance long-term stability, reliability through 2 projects. And I'll talk about the Northland Reliability Project, which is a 180-mile transmission line from northern Minnesota to central Minnesota a little bit later. But something I want you all to know, oh wait. Yeah, I think I went too, yeah. Sorry about that. Something I do want you to know is that GRE is really proud to be one of the 20 cooperatives that was recognized last year by NRECA for completing 10 cybersecurity goals. You all know how critical cybersecurity is in today's environment. We're always working really hard to improve and protect our security posture. One of the most important things we did last year is we constructed a new state-of-the-art control center at Maple Grove, which is our headquarters, to serve as our primary control center. It used to be located at our Elk River facility, but this new control center provides our system operators with really the latest technology, improving visibility of the bulk electric system, better situational awareness, because as we move forward, both transmission and generation infrastructure just becomes more and more complex. And so our ability to manage through a lot of contingencies becomes really important. And we were certified by NERC and MRO, the Midwest Reliability Organization, in November of last year to operate the facility. So we're really proud of that. And then finally, just a environmental accomplishment. We restored nearly 300 acres of native prairie and pollinator habitat at more than 100 sites in Minnesota to support pollinator the pollinator habitat that birds and bees and butterflies need to eat, live, and do their work. So we're really proud of launching Pollinator Strong. It's an initiative where we increase the acreage of pollinator habitats at 11 sites, covering about 22.6 acres. And financially, we had a successful year, a remarkably successful year. As a not-for-profit organization and as a cooperative, we operate at cost. And we only collect enough revenue that we can to run the business and meet our financial obligations. And when we collect more, like Tracy was talking about, we return those dollars to our members through patronage capital payments. And we were able to return $25 million in patronage capital to members in March of 2023. And then in this March, we were able to return another $15 million. And we expect to issue returns for years to come. You probably remembered that we achieved that long-term goal that we had to return patronage capital to members 6 years ago. And it was a really big milestone, culmination of a plan that our board of directors had established and endorsed more than 15 years ago. So in 2023, we were able to close the books on a remarkable year with historically strong margins. And before allocating our margins, our 2023 margin was $74.4 million. We deferred $30 million of that to offset future rate increases, and we returned $35.4 million to member owners through bill credits throughout the year. So we ended with a margin of $44.6 million. And our Fitch rating in 2023 was upgraded to A with a stable outlook, which is really an important metric for GRE because it impacts our capital market activities and it allows us to remain competitive for our members. So we've had a pretty remarkable transition over the course of a decade when it comes to our power supply. You know, we've kept a pretty close eye on costs and reliability. We have a capacity and energy hedge contract with the purchaser of our old coal plant, Coal Creek Station in North Dakota. The owner is Rainbow Energy, and the purchase amount is currently 550 megawatts, and that'll step down in increments until the contract expires in 2031. GRE also has 1,400 megawatts of natural gas peaking generation in Minnesota, and these are plants that are reliable. They're like jet engines, right? They're flexible. They can be turned on and off. We operate them very little time of the year, but it is generating capacity and capability that's backed up with on-site fuel, which is really important for winter reliability. So it's really great that we have this generation. And of course, like I said before, we've got our wind power purchase agreements for over 1,800 megawatts. Our portfolio also depends on ready-to-access electricity market, which is the MISO market we belong to. So we are a member, Great River Energy is a member of MISO, the regional grid operator, and MISO coordinates a pretty massive energy market that covers 15 states with hundreds of energy resources connected by thousands of miles of transmission. And this is important for us as we go forward because it allows for the free flow of energy across state lines, and it allows us to purchase capacity as we need it. So being a member of MISO benefits our cooperative members. It gives us access to a pretty vast pool of resources and helps us maintain reliability. And as you can see on this slide, from today, 2023, 24 to 2037, we're going in pretty significant transition in our power supply. A portfolio that's primarily renewable and carbon-free is what we're working toward here. In fact, by 2037, you'll see on the slide that nearly 3/4 of our energy is through wind. And that progress that we are making started well over a decade ago. And it puts us in a really favorable position today to comply with Minnesota's carbon-free standard. In fact, by 2035, we expect our retail electric sales will be provided by a 90% carbon-free power supply portfolio. Oops, touchy little thing. So again, all around us, things are evolving. And our electric grid in this country has been described as the largest, most complicated machine that's ever been built by man. You've read that before, you've heard that before. And as we look forward, there are so many utilities and cooperatives like GRE that are moving more toward a decarbonized generation fleet. So that is not changing this fact. This transition that we're undergoing, that we continue to see in generation, we expect the electric grid to become exponentially larger and even more complicated. So you all know this, right? When you read the papers, you watch the news, the electric industry is in a complete and holistic evolution. We all know the generation mix is changing. Coal has been the backbone of our power supply since the 1960s. It's retiring. 50% of the nation's coal by 2030 is expected to retire. In fact, within 10 years, coal-fired plants in the state will cease to exist, in our state. So while we're all aware of this change, it's the pace, the speed of this change that's really staggering to most of us. It's a very fast pace for an industry that's capital intensive like we are and provides a critical service. And at the same time, you see how we're using electricity is changing. So electrification is not a what if, it really is a when. And then this year, NERC came out with their projection of load growth, and they said that they see an end to flat load growth, that it's not driven by traditional measures. The load growth we're starting to see are large spot load growths. GRE has seen this through its members where they are getting requests. They're getting requests, and then we're analyzing it with regard to the system, upwards of 1,000 megawatts at a single location. That's a lot. That's not natural traditional load growth. And extreme weather events are starting to increase the need for us to really look after age and condition of our infrastructure in a pretty methodical way. So we're talking about how do we maintain reliability as we become more and more dependent on wind and solar, and our demand for power is not just greater, but it's becoming more dynamic. Well, one of the ways is through transmission. And that means maintaining and improving the transmission that we have and building new transmission. And going forward, we believe that it becomes a central piece of our energy system to make sure that you all can get sufficient energy when you need it. So over the years, GRE has built a pretty robust system of transmission in Minnesota and some in North Dakota as well. If you stretched out all the transmission that GRE owns and maintains, it would go from Minnesota to Rome, Italy. Our communications did that for me. But that's how much transmission is needed to serve our members. It takes more than 100 substations, 5,000 miles of transmission to serve our 27 member owner cooperatives. And one point I want to make on this slide that you're looking at is what you see in red is GRE owned transmission. What's green is transmission that's owned by others, maybe Minnesota Power, Otter Tail Power, Xcel Energy. And the point of the slide is that we are deeply interconnected from a transmission perspective in the state of Minnesota. We have 17 other transmission owners that have transmission in this state. And, an example of the interconnectedness is the fact that Lake Country Power is served by not just GRE, but also the transmission facilities of Minnesota Power. And as our generation evolves around us and loads grow, so does our transmission system. So I do like to always show this because you see the drivers that require GRE to upgrade or expand our system, right? Large spot loads like data centers, older transmission lines that need upgrades that were built in the 60s and 70s and need to be replaced. Transmission isn't just needed to interconnect new generation, but it is needed to maintain reliability when big generation retires. You need to also have the right amount of transmission to maintain reliability. And the attributes of our system, which you see on the slide, this is how we have to plan and design our system. It's influenced by the attributes of our system in Minnesota. We serve 2/3 of the state geographically, but less than 20% of the electrical demand. And on average, our members serve 7 customers per line mile. So that does put affordability on the front burner for us, big time. We have member customers that are served by radial lines, and depending on where they are, we can't loop the system because it's difficult or it's cost prohibitive. So that's a huge challenge for us. And we're dependent on 17 other transmission providers, like I showed you before. So our member customers are oftentimes, their reliability and resiliency is dependent on the systems of other transmission providers. So we always try to balance our spending on lower voltage, load serving system against some of the regional transmission that we need. And I like to show this because it's really important for everybody to see the age of our infrastructure, right? It won't be a big shock because this is pretty typical for a lot of companies across the United States. Reinvestment in our existing infrastructure is a top priority for GRE. And it is the case, I think, for many cooperatives and utilities, like you heard from Mark today. We have, thousands of miles of transmission that's reaching its average life expectancy of 72 years. About 4,800 miles of transmission that was built mostly in the 60s and 70s that we're needing to upgrade over time. And we're planning this over the next 20 years, actually. So when you see this chart, it doesn't mean that just because a line is built in 1952 that it's got to be replaced in this year. It just means that the infrastructure, as it gets closer to its life expectancy, just has a greater risk of failure. And we use age as a foundation. But then we do look at other attributes of that infrastructure, like structure type, insulator, reliability data. We have some sophisticated data analytics to find the sweet spot so we know where to invest and upgrade and where we can wait it out. But as time goes on, this is becoming a significant part of GRE Transmission's capital budget. In fact, it's about 85% going forward. So we have a pretty systematic approach, and we're starting to increase our annual replacement from 55 to probably 75 miles per year. So that leads me to what GRE has been focused on when it comes to Lake Country Power. We serve 47 of Lake Country Power's distribution substations. And over the past 5 years, we've invested around $8 million in age and condition upgrades. In fact, we're working on a project right now in Mille Lacs. It's about $18.5 million projects in Mille Lacs area that's expected to provide Lake Country Power territory with additional reliability by actually providing some looped service. In the next 5 years, we plan to invest in Lake Country Power by nearly $40 million. Again, age and condition upgrades and rebuilds. And then a few years back, transmission engaged in a climate assessment, risk assessment, so that we could start informing our decision making around design, construction, and the risk of infrastructure failure due to weather events. And in northern Minnesota, it's no surprise to you, as we look out 40, 50 years, the risk of drier weather, we started to create a wildfire mitigation plan. And so we do have a wildfire mitigation plan that provides our maintenance practices, veg management standards, ramping up asset renewal, and other operational procedures in place to manage that risk. One thing I do want to talk about is we're, in addition to upgrading and reinvesting in existing transmission, we're working to optimize it. So get the most out of what we have out there already. And this is an industry-wide movement to optimize existing infrastructure. Maybe you have heard of enhanced transmission technology or grid enhancing technology. We support that. The problem that we're facing right now is there's way more generation that's trying to get on the system than the transmission system can take, and it's creating congestion. We've heard about this a lot in Minnesota, a lot of congestion on the system at certain times because more generation is trying to get on. Most utilities like Great River Energy operate transmission lines using static ratings on our lines. We identify really conservative limits for our lines. And the reason why is because we want to make sure that the line can safely carry power without overheating. So we use those lines, those static ratings, in planning and in operations, and they're conservative. And all utilities have done that for forever. There is a movement afoot to make sure that we're not being too conservative, because the more capacity we can get off of our system safely, the better it is for everybody, for cost-effective power, as well as reliability. So last year, we partnered with Heimdall Power, and they're a grid technology company in Norway. They have a sensor technology that you can see on the line, that sphere. They're called neurons. And they have a technology where they can calculate the actual temperature of the transmission line based on actual thermal conditions in real time. And what that does is it gives us granular real-time data, and it helps us understand if we can expand the capacity rating for that line in real time. And we're able to then set new operational limits for that line. So this is a technology that we have piloted. On the line that we piloted it on, we saw a 40% increase in capacity. So now we're working with them on some congested lines that we have to see how much more capacity we can increase with 52 of these neuron sensors that we're adding onto our system. So we're really excited to see some of those results. And that's the kind of thing that we have to do that's low cost, but also can increase and optimize the system that we have. And like many utilities across the country, we're looking for federal funding for transmission projects that involve resiliency and innovation investments. So the reason why is that if our proposal is accepted by the DOE, we share in the cost 50-50. So they'll pay 50%, we pay 50%. So we've applied for about $140 million in projects, and we would pay $70 million. And of that $140 million we've applied for, $57 million of that is in Lake Country Power's territory. And so what you see on the slide are the buckets of grid resiliency and innovation that we're seeking in your territory. rebuilding 54 miles of transmission, installing a battery, a 2 to 3 megawatt battery that would provide 8 to 12 hours of capacity of energy, 5 motor operated switches. So in the coming months, we'll learn more about this, but we're really excited about our proposal. And then I want to end by talking about regional transmission. You know, we're heavily focused on transforming our higher voltage system. And when you look at regional and national transmission that we have today across the country, it's really utilities that came together and created this patchwork of systems across the country that interconnected. But it was a whole grid that was designed around coal and gas, right? It was designed for resources that operated 24/7 and resources that could provide energy on demand. Resources that were regionally based, not dispersed. And as we move toward power sources that are more dispersed, we naturally have to add the transmission, transform the transmission to get that power to load centers and where it needs to be. So we need to be able to move a lot of power long distances. We need larger, high voltage regional transmission, and that becomes the key. And let me talk a little bit about what we've been doing in that regard. Like I said, we're a member of MISO, which is our regional grid operator. And MISO, the MISO members are like GRE. You know, the MISO covers 15 states, province of Manitoba. They have a $40 billion energy market, and they run a regional transmission planning process that we participate in pretty much every day out of the year. And through that process, we and other stakeholders in the MISO process agree on what transmission needs to be added and upgraded on the high voltage system. That benefits everyone. And what you see in the green, that's the MISO footprint, and we're a part of that. And they will look out, we and other transmission owners look out 20 years and look at a number of scenarios to plan the transmission system. You know, what could the future resource mix look like? What does load look like? You know, what are the best transmission solutions? How do we allocate costs? All of this is discussed, and MISO will then issue its portfolio of projects that we have all contributed our expertise to. So in 2022, you likely remember through other meetings that were that happened with either GRE or Lake Country Power, that in 2022 MISO approved a historic portfolio, the biggest in the country, of $10 billion portfolio of 18 projects. One of the most complex transmission studies that was done by MISO in its history, and one of the largest simultaneous build-outs in the country since electrification. And while the primary driver was, while the primary driver for the whole transmission effort is decarbonization, this effort was all about reliability. All of these projects, the main driver was maintaining reliability. They're all high voltage, 345 kV projects, and they're designed to work together. And this is historic. I mean, we are in historic times. GRE is involved in 2 of the projects. The east-west Burgundy line that you see in Minnesota, that's the Alex to Big Oaks line. We're an owner of that. There are 5 owners, and then our primary project is that north-south orange line that you see that I'll talk about briefly, the Northland Reliability Project. So we're developing this project. Not only is it the biggest transmission project in the state, but it's also one of the biggest transmission build-outs in the country. It's a 180-mile double-circuit 345 line from northern Minnesota to central Minnesota. We're partnering with Minnesota Power, 50-50 ownership. We're the project manager for the project. It's routed mostly on existing corridor, and this is an important project to northern Minnesota because it keeps the lights on and it keeps the grid stable and safe. It's driven by reliability. It's not about interconnecting renewables, but it provides a reliable path for power flow from southern Minnesota to northern Minnesota. What's happened in northern Minnesota over the years is as coal has retired, and of course you've also got the Boswell units that will retire in 2029 and 2035. As those retirements happen during the coldest, most dire times of the year in the winter when your load is increasing, the only way power can go from southern Minnesota to northern Minnesota is through 115 kV lines and 230 kV lines. And it's not enough. This is a 345 kV line that provides voltage stability and allows power to safely move up during the most cold and dire times of the year and high load times. That's why this project is really important to northern Minnesota. And right now it's in the regulatory process. We expect to get our permits by the end of the year. And this is just quickly, just by the numbers, I won't talk about all of these, but the Northland Reliability Project that I showed you, it solves, for 83, reliability issues are fixed on 83 circuits that total about 1,300 miles. Without this, 980 megawatts of load in northern Minnesota would be at high risk for voltage instability. It also helps with congestion and annual carbon reductions, which are pretty significant. So what you see on the left side is when you add all those projects up, those are the benefits that you see. And these are the things that we study with MISO. And more is underway. This is what we're working on now, is this plan that MISO released very recently. And what you see on this map is about $17 to $23 billion worth of transmission in MISO. But what's significant about this is the plan that starts taking us from 40% decarbonization, which is what the last portfolio will give us, to 60%. But this is what it takes to meet the Minnesota standard and states that have their own standards. So we're working with MISO on this next set, and what you see in the green is a 765 kV superhighway. So they're starting to design a new superhighway of transmission in the MISO footprint, which is new. There's some 765 in Illinois, but this is a whole new footprint, and we're starting to talk about, is this the right plan? Can all the transmission owners get behind this? One 765 line is the equivalent of 6 345 kV lines. So it doesn't look like a lot, but if you actually made the green into 345s, you'd have a lot of lines that would traverse a lot of our communities. So we support 765.
Question.
Yeah.
Where's your generation originating at to put up this transmission?
Oh.
Where's the generation originating from?
So for this,
Not transmission, where's the generation?
sure. So what MISO does and what the stakeholders do is we have generation assumed in various parts of the MISO footprint that's based on the utilities' integrated resource plans and some assumptions that the stakeholders make together. We don't always agree on those assumptions, but those are usually created by the plans of all the companies. So GRE's plans for our integrated resource plans would be included in there. They also include state policies as well. So if a state has a 2040 policy, they'll include that as part of the assumption to get the right transmission in place to be able to deliver what is needed.
You never answered your question.
Yeah, Sherwood's shutting down. Monticello's going to be retired. Minnesota Power's going to retire that. I don't see a lot of wind farms that's going to support your transmission. And solar. I mean, that's what I'm getting to. Where is the wind and where is the solar originating at to get on these transmission lines? You're talking about transmitting electricity, but where's the generation originating from?
The generation is originating from all of the states that are in the MISO footprint. The generation is assumed that produces the output of the transmission. It is all over the entire MISO footprint. It's in Minnesota, there's some in North Dakota. Iowa has a lot of wind, that's assumed. You've got, you know, I don't know how much is in Missouri, but Indiana, Illinois, you've got stuff in Michigan. They have assumptions around the generation that is assumed for the output of the transmission system. And part of what we support about this is the fact that it can move power in large amounts, at large scales. And that's the piece that we support about this proposal. Is that all right? So thank you for the question, and I'm happy to talk more even after if you'd like. But I just want to wrap it up because I know that this was kind of a lot. I want to just thank all of you, and I want to thank our members. But in particular, I want to really thank Bob Bruckbauer, the leadership that Bob has had at GRE. Craig Olson, the leadership of Mark Bach and the member manager group is pretty phenomenal. So you all are quite lucky to have them as part of your cooperative. And I really thank you for welcoming me here today. And I do have something that I would like to provide Lake Country Power Mark. So we always like to provide a contribution in support and appreciation of your Operation Roundup. And this year, GRE has actually increased the contribution, and it will be $25,628. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you.